We are still in the shadow of the Earth Day that heralds our planet and its spectacular natural riches, and how it is the human race's obligation to preserve and protect it. In this context, it's not every day that the media pays any attention to issues that may seem marginal but are significant in their impact on what is known as Earth's biodiversity. Simply put, biodiversity means the astonishingly large variety of life on Earth. Although the idea that everything on this planet is eventually connected and hence anything that happens anywhere at all affects everything everywhere has been around for a while, it is only in recent years that ordinary people have begun to make that connection. Subir Ghosh, a Bengaluru-based journalist and writer, has chosen to address the theme of biodiversity from the standpoint of how the global fashion industry affects it. On the face of it, it may seem like a stretch, but it is anything but, since everything that the fashion industry depends upon for material has a direct bearing on biodiversity. Subir wrote a special piece in the Fiber to Fashion magazine's April issue headlined "Missing the Forest for the Trees." Mayank Chhaya Reports interviewed Subir to explore what all this means. Journalist and author Subir Ghosh. Subir, at first glance, the fashion industry's impact on biodiversity seems at best like a marginal issue for the woke crowd. It is anything but, as you point out in your remarkable piece. Please talk a bit more about what you think is going on there.
See, talking about this subject is extremely difficult because you really don't know where to start. And in such a situation, the best place to start would be where one actually began. Let's take you down a little on a little bit of say environmental history and a little bit of my personal journey. Okay, now see, modern environmental history in some ways begins with Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. That was in the very early 1960s. But no, the real modern environmental history kind of begins with the former Norwegian Prime Minister Gro Harlem Brundtland's work, which was known as the Brundtland Commission, and its report in 1987 called Our Common Future, which led to the 1992 Rio Summit. And that is where more or less most of the more modern environmental history kind of starts. Now, that is one thing. Second is, let us just do a quick recap on how we, or let's say people of our generation, your, mine, how we have looked at environmental issues. Now, if you would remember, in the very 80s, 30, 40 years from now, when we were in school, all talk about environment was confined to planting saplings. So you would have in the township there where we used to live, we would have a one Mahotsav day once a year, and you would go and plant 1 or 2, 3 saplings here and there, and that would be the end of it. This thing changed in the very early 1990s. With the Rio Summit, and that's where a lot of today's organization kind of have their roots in. Now, even in the early 1990s, when people talked about saving the environment or doing anything about the environment, this was still confined to those planting of saplings, and also a little bit of you do something about power consumption, so you just switch off the electrical gadgets when those are not working, and you switch off the tap so that there's no running water, etc. This changed a little bit to using of CFL bulbs, etc., etc. But today it has changed dramatically. So the early 90s, if you look at it, environment was seen as a kind of a subject area. Today, environment is not a subject area. It is a way of looking at things. And that thing has happened primarily because the people who were the culprits, who were actually the villains of the piece all this time, industry. The industry has been much more conscious than it was, say, 40 years back. Of course, there is a lot of greenwashing around issues of sustainability, etc. I personally think maybe half of the claims being made are probably greenwashing stuff. But then there's also the other half. No, that is true. Those are actually proactive measures, etc. Now that's industry as a whole. But now, if you just or narrow your focus down a little bit to the fashion industry. Now, the fashion industry itself also would be guilty of the same things for the last 40 years. In the 1990s, nobody had a clue about what to do, what was what. It was confined to the planting of saplings, etc. But what I have seen personally in the last 6-7 years, that there has been remarkable change within the textiles, apparel, fashion industry. I mean, that's a very broad way of looking at the industry itself, because there are far too many overlapping areas. But for the sake of convenience, that's what we prefer to call it: the textiles, apparel, fashion industry. And like I said, that there has been a lot of significant change within the industry, because for very much the fact that I mentioned earlier, that environment is no more a subject area. It is no more in the newspapers. It's just not a page devoted once a week. It has changed. So it is now a way of looking at things. And in one of the interviews accompanying that article, so there's this person from WWF who points out that today you have a former chief sustainability officer of a big company now becoming the CEO of that company, which is H&M. This would have not been possible, or you could not even have thought of it even 5 years earlier. The fact remains so the thing is that the fashion industry has been able to change considerably. But that will bring us to the subject in hand. What I have seen over the last 20, 30 years of me in the profession, the last 7, 8 years working on this textiles and apparel industry, is that this industry, like I said, so many years ago had no clue what was what, but has been now able to put a lot of things in place. There is a lot of brainwashing, but a lot of things have been put in place. But what I find is that a lot of these measures, so to speak, are kind of cosmetic, in the sense that if you go through the annual sustainability reports of most companies, they list out all the things that they have done over the last 1 year, which we did so much of solar rooftops, and we did so much of manicured lawns in our premises, and we planted so many trees within the premises, and we cut down water consumption by this much. We cut down power consumption by this much. We cut down our effluent discharge so much. But that is kind of limiting yourself to your premises.
Right.
This is something that this gentleman from WWF also points out, that it's a very human thing not to look beyond our noses, right? It's not to blame the fashion industry or anyone. It's a very human thing,
right?
But see, my kind of work has always been to kind of step back and look at the bigger picture. Now, I personally thought that the industry that I am kind of involved with in the sense of my work is really not looking at the big picture. The big picture is the planet in itself. When you say that we are cutting down power consumption, and we are going or cutting down power consumption because of the fossil fuels, and therefore we are going for solar power, etc. To me, it really doesn't mean much beyond a point. You have to look at the planet. If you're really looking at saving the planet, you have to think of the planet as as a living entity. No, that's why I like the term that the WWF uses, which is that it's a living planet.
Yeah.
Right. You
Yeah.
have to look at it as a living planet. So you have to look beyond your premises. You have to understand lots of things, and which is what the interview itself, which was accompanying the piece, kind of deals with kind of threadbare the issues of landscapes, the issue of habitats, the issue of ecosystems, and biodiversity. All these would seem very disparate terms, but all these are kind of interlinked. Now, a
Right.
landscape in itself doesn't mean anything. It's a landscape is a habitat. When it's a habitat, you have biodiversity, and then it becomes an ecosystem. So you have it's a very imperative that that you start to look at ecosystems, you start to look at landscapes, you start to look at habitats when you're thinking about saving the planet. So this kind of is a very broad backdrop to the subject in question.
Right. To narrow it down for the purposes of this conversation, as I mentioned in my earlier exchange with you on email, uh, can you talk somewhat about the fashion industry's dependence on forest-based fibers such as viscose that you mentioned in your story? Now, in the same context, I would also like to point out that beyond fashion industry, we all depend on fiber, which is also in many ways forest-based. So, is it just the forest industry, I mean, the fashion industry, or it's generally the way human beings are in terms of clothing themselves?
Kind of both and all. I mean, let's put it that way. No. If you mentioned, let's go in the order
Right.
that you mentioned. You mentioned viscose. Viscose is primarily what we in our industry call the MMCF, which is man-made cellulosic fiber. Now, right now, the stats that I have are from 2018, and that time the annual consumption of viscose, the annual not consumption, the annual production of viscose in 2018 was about 6.7 MMT, 6.7 million metric tons, which was roughly 6.2% of the global fiber consumption. I have to understand how the fiber market or the fiber industry kind of works. Right now, it's a heavily polyester driven market. It's about what 51.5% is polyester. Our cotton is about 24.4%. And viscose, etc., are about 6.2%. Now, so right now viscose is very small compared to let's say polyester and cotton combined. Now, what has been happening the last few years is that there is a little bit of movement or a campaign against polyester. For two reasons. One is because it's based on fossil fuels, number one, and number two is the oceanic pollution that it kind of eventually causes. Right. A lot of stuff goes down the drain from your washing machine down the drains and into the oceans and disrupting marine life and causing oceanic acidity, etc., etc. Now, that's still the latter part is relatively new. Now, studies are still going on. I mean, you don't really have real solid numbers, but the trends are already there. But then coming back to viscose, since that's what we're talking about, so there is a little bit of a tendency among some players to shun polyester and go in for viscose. But these are very early stages right now. So there has not been a heavy shift towards viscose as of now. But in case it does, then there will be tremendous pressure on forests. Now, see, most of the viscose, most of the viscose is kind of it's a forest produce essentially. When lots of people don't know that viscose or rayon is a forest produce. So that is something that needs to be kept in mind for most people. Now, most of the viscose that come from managed forests. Those are not produced by plundering of forests, which is very different.
Right.
But the thing is that unless you have 100% traceability, there's really no way of finding out, unless those are the very, very big companies in question. Unless keep them aside, then you won't really know where your viscose is actually coming from, unless you have a total blockchain kind of traceability down and up the supply chain. So that is a little bit of a worrying factor that one kind of needs to keep in mind. That if people try to shift towards viscose, so it will create some problems. Also, one needs to keep in mind one thing, that anything that is green or something like that is not necessarily organic friendly, not necessarily environment friendly. Right? Just because you're shifting from polyester doesn't mean that you're doing a lot of good. Right? Because even if you end up chopping forests like nobody's business, no, if you have to make the transformation from 50%, which is 50%, 51.5% of polyester, which is roughly 55 million metric tons annually. If you want to make that shift from 55%, then you really have to chop down a lot of forests.
Exactly.
But you just don't have to chop down, but you have to grow forests at the same time, right? Because you're pulling down forests every year. There has to be a little bit of regeneration. You have to keep on growing. It's a very messy thing that nobody would really want to go into.
Exactly.
Not everything green, or rather, not everything that is apparently green is environment friendly. And the biggest example probably is the question of biofuels.
Right.
Biofuels, it is estimated that this will cause deforestation to the extent of about 7 million hectares in about 9 to 10 years by 2030. So it's a very, very human thing about how you use forests, for what purpose, etc.
Okay. Has the adverse impact of the fashion industry been quantified? I saw a fairly detailed table in your story. What kind of numbers are we talking about compared to, say, other industries? Because in that context, I think that my next question would be about even your point that somehow the fashion industry has escaped the kind of indictment that a lot of other industries have suffered. So talk a bit about the quantification of the impact first.
As you say, so the table that you mentioned is kind of draws from a study made by the United Nations Environment Program about say, I think 4 or 5 years back. What it does is basically it points out at what stages of the apparel production chain does it impact or particular aspects of, say, biodiversity. That is what it does. It does not really quantify. It does not really quantify. There's no way of quantifying things. Even though, according to, you will find it on the website of the Convention on Biological Diversity, that there are metrics to kind of go by. But specific to the fashion industry, I mean, it's really lots of things are really impossible. Effluent discharge, it's possible to quantify. GHG emissions, it's possible to quantify. But how do you quantify biodiversity loss? But there are metrics which will give you the kind of trends. I'll give you an example of why we talk about so much about landscapes in my story. I'll give you an example. A few years back, There was a study. This is just one example, right? Uh, a study conducted by certain scientists in Pakistan found that in a cluster of cotton fields, they found almost 3,000 individual spiders. Now, these spiders uh, were across nine families, 40 plus genera, and they found that there were 101 species only of spiders in in that cluster of cotton fields. Now, here, so what it means is that you have to look at those cotton fields as an ecosystem, right? This is these are very small ways of the kind of quantifying things that in a particular kind of field which has this kind of spiders. There are lots of insects, lots of hundreds and hundreds of kinds of insects that you will find in a cotton field, not all of which are pests. There are lots of insects which are beneficial to farmers. There's lots of insects which are right from arthropods to beetles to everything. Most of the invertebrate species are kind of beneficial to farmers. So that's probably one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is you expand your base from the cotton field into the landscape, right? Now you have in many cases you have very light forests or very dense forests around cotton fields. These kind of constitute a landscape, right? Now, if you chop down the trees all around the fields, then there's going to be a problem of soil erosion. There are going to be other problems, especially given the fact that cotton needs a lot of water. Now, if you look at it as a landscape, then you have lots of kinds of trees around, then it acts as a watershed, then it also draws in water, and therefore you don't need to irrigate those lands. So that's again another way of looking at the same subject, that you look at it as a landscape. Now, there have been lots of organizations over the last few years, say wildlife organizations, etc., who have been working with cotton farmers in lots of different areas. There's a huge project going on, I think, in Madhya Pradesh, where you look at the entire the cotton growing area as a landscape. You look at it when you look at it as a landscape. You look at it also in terms of biodiversity. You look at it as habitat. So that's once again it becomes another way of looking at it. Now, what is significant about the table that you mentioned is that there are many ways of looking at the same subject. Right. And across the chain, different. We are talking about only of cotton fields. So this is the kind of impact that a cotton field can have on biodiversity, and also the other way around. Like if you build a landscape, then it also has a positive effect on cotton farming. Now, if you go slightly up the supply chain, then you need to look at go up the chain by spinning and weaving and knitting, and go to garmenting, and go right up to retail. Now how does this thing affect the retail industry? I'll give you this example is once I pointed out in that long interview, but I'll tell you how. That we know the reason why I mentioned earlier is that you need to look beyond your noses. That you can't only keep on thinking about what you can do within the premises of your factory. Now, what happened last year, I think the year before last, is that there were these huge floods in lots of cities in China, and which is true of almost all the recent urban floods, be it Mumbai, be it Chennai, be it anywhere. Most of this have been caused, or rather, what the factor that is attributed to these a lot of these floods are the depletion of wetlands on the outskirts of most of these cities. What are these wetlands? Wetlands are just not about lakes. It's about biodiversity. It's about habitat. It's about an ecosystem. You have to look at these ecosystems which lie beyond your noses. So that's one thing that you can do in terms of say farming. That's a kind of a direct intervention. Here, in the case of retail, the example that you give, when you're an outlet in a huge city and the floods disrupt either your stores, or if you have a factory there, then your entire supply chain is disrupted. So you have to look at how ecosystems work.
Right, right. One important point that you make in your article is that the textile apparel fashion industry has somehow escaped the kind of indictment that a lot of other industries suffer and experience. Why do you think that is?
That's in a way, first of all, is because nobody, 10 years back knew anything about anything.
Right.
Nobody knew. When there's this third piece in the cover package on fashion and diversity, which is a classic example of this. Now it's about the Tibetan antelope, which used to be killed for the underfur that was used to make the shadu shawl. Now, it was only in 1993 that a wildlife scientist who was doing field research in the Tibetan plateau discovered these carcasses lying all around, and he pieces all these points together. I mean, joined all the dots and came to the conclusion that the Tibetan antelope, also known as the chiru, was being slaughtered for the underfur. Right. But the thing is that the shadu shawl is not 20 or 30 years old. It's probably goes on a few hundred years.
Right.
So for a few hundred years, nobody knew.
Absolutely.
For nobody knew that a very delicate, fragile creature is being slaughtered by the hundreds, by the thousands to weave that exquisite kind of shawl. That is just one example. Telling you that lots of things people didn't know so many years back. But what has happened in the last, especially the last 5-10 years, is that not only because of the explosion of the internet and social media and all that, people in the industry really know. That's one thing. Another thing is that why they have escaped kind of indictment. The answer would be both yes and no. One is that because where you didn't know where to kind of pin the blame, number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, most of the criticism of the fashion industry has been mostly to do with worker rights, garment workers primarily. I mean, it has I mean, even in the 80s, I remember reading reports about sweatshops around the world. And the condition of garment workers kind of still remains kind of deplorable. Now I have the numbers with me. I mean, in Belgium, the minimum, this is the minimum wage, right? Not the average wage. The minimum wage for a garment worker is about $1,700, right? In China, it's about $220. In India, it's about $160-$170. In Bangladesh, it's about half of that.
Right.
So so you can more or less anyone can gauge the kind of life that garment workers lead in most of these apparel manufacturing companies. And Belgium is nothing. No, if China, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Cambodia, this is the garment manufacturing hub, so to speak. So, but we are talking of the criticism of the industry. So so this criticism has been there, and I mean you will find it kind of almost all over social media all the time. What also needs to be kept in mind, that is something that I have realized, is that the fashion industry, when it's just the fashion industry, is the front end. The back end is kind of textiles and garmenting. Fashion is the kind of the front, the face of the face of the
it all. Yeah.
The fashion industry is a very soft target, right? No, if you no, you wouldn't really most of these activists who work uh, on the issue of garment workers. Not to say that they are doing a wrong thing. Of course, they aren't. But the thing is that you won't find activists protesting against a mining group.
Exactly.
Oh, if you going to go and protest against a mining group and and create a ruckus in front of their office, something like that, they will just bump you off, plain and simple, right?
Yeah.
But that is not true of the fashion industry. That is not. What would do these activists mostly? They will go and protest in front of a store, and there was these young kids who man these stores, and they will be scared out of their wits, and they will just back out. The same goes up the chain also. No, all this. So whenever there's a scandal or something, the CEOs and the presidents and the vice presidents will kind of chicken out and kind of more or less kind of give in. This is for a number of reasons. One is that it's a very image conscious industry, right? I mean, fashion is about image. So they are, many of them are worried about their image. So if you have a report about, say, Burberry or someone burning its extra stock, and if there's a furor on social media, then they will kind of more or less back out, right? And if you also, for the same reason, if you have Western brands not paying their suppliers in these Southeast Asian nations, then if there's a furor, then they will kind of give in a little bit. I mean, it has happened. Not not all Western brands and retailers have paid up their suppliers in Southeast Asia, etc. But many of them have. Many of them have. So it kind of works. But it doesn't really work in case of lots of other industries.
Absolutely.
Why I keep on insisting about the the fashion industry being a soft target is that if you scroll through any social media site and look for these specific kind of reports and incidents, you will find that most of it is kind of confined to the fashion industry. It is not that only the fashion industry did not pay up. I'm pretty sure there were lots of other industries who did not pay their suppliers in all these countries, right?
Right.
It is not possible for me to believe that only apparel companies did not pay up. Today, the kind of while it was true earlier that they were not indicted for all their sins earlier. Now the reverse is kind of true. Now you can just haul up any apparel brand, any fashion brand, and just say whatever you like without any kind of proof.
Right.
And this is kind of supported or kind of boosted by lots of journalists. I'll give you an example which happened today, which is April 19th. So there is an article on the Al Jazeera website and how the fast fashion industry is ruining India. Now, it all makes for a very good Vogue article. Vogue article, but it really is not rooted in science. It really is not rooted in actual numbers. This article says that 22,500 liters of water is used to produce 1 kg of cotton. I mean, where do these journalists get these numbers from? It suits the convenience in the sense of that you're writing these tailor-made articles for a very particular kind of an audience. But the thing is, these articles do more harm than any kind of good. It is true that the cotton uses a lot of water. But the thing is that cotton, as in cotton farming, right? It does use a lot of water. But the thing is that even all the water that is used, I mean, does not go down the drain, right?
True.
It's agriculture, right? I mean, the water is the crop uses up the water. It's not wastage of water, but it is a water guzzling crop, of course.
Right.
So the same thing you will find on some other website, that you will find the number to be 2,500 liters of water is used to produce a one t-shirt. Again, this is utter rubbish. When if you ask them, they will not be able to give you the source, because there is no source. It is something probably somebody figured out or calculated or no over maybe around a pot or something 20 years back, and the same numbers are being recycled over the years. So there is a problem with numbers there. Since fashion industry remains a kind of a soft target, so nobody kind of questions these numbers.
Exactly. No, you're right. You're right.
The other thing is that it is also called the second most polluting industry in the world after oil. Who has given you these numbers? Nobody has these numbers. Most of these numbers around the second most polluting industry come from some obscure World Bank document dated about 20-30 years back, which has been removed from the World Bank site anyway. But the thing is, the journalists, activists,
they continue
to nobody knows whether it's, for all I know, it might be the most polluting industry anyway, right? The thing is that when you're making a scientific argument, when you're making an argument based on numbers, your numbers have to be correct, right?
Right.
So nobody knows. The same thing goes for in terms of climate change. Say that again, it is responsible for so much emissions. But the thing is that now, if you look at most of the actual sources in terms of emission studies, most of these are broken down in terms of activity, not in terms of industry. If so many, say 30% of GHG emissions are attributed to transport, right? How do you know how much of this is caused by the fashion industry, which is trade driven, right? So there is a lot of shipping, there's a lot of air freight, etc.
Exactly.
There's a lot of road transport, etc. So the fashion industry contributes, so to speak,
right,
to the transport segment of the. The thing is that my point is that all these have not been broken down in a way that it can be heaped on the fashion industry.
That's true. Yeah.
So all this kind of reasoning, which is not based on science, which is not based on real credible numbers, make for a very, very messy kind of a situation, and I really don't know what's the way out of it. The way out probably is to generate real good credible numbers.
Yeah, just last couple of points. One is, of course, there is a great deal of conflating that's going on. As you mentioned, what happens is maybe some people connect, say, fiber for leather or wool or fur that come from animals that in turn create greenhouse gases by methane emission. And therefore, the fashion industry is hugely responsible for, say, 18% of greenhouse gases. That's the conflation that one comes across. But do you think there is some substance to the fact that, like I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, the fact that human beings exist at all is detrimental to the planet now? That's where we are now.
Of course, I mean, I believe that, but then, no, that's true. That's, of course, true. But we are not on the top of the food chain, just for the hell of it, right? The human beings are not the fastest, human beings are not the strongest, but human beings are certainly the most wicked. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The way we can we can survive. But that thing about survival doesn't necessarily mean that this fight for survival is driven by reasoning, right? We talk about reasoning because there's a need to do a lot of things to save the planet, which is a living planet.
Right. On a very narrow, specific point, you talk about the Fashion Pact. What is the Fashion Pact?
No, it's a coalition of brands. It's a coalition of brands who came together with a very specific agenda to cut down the adverse impact of the fashion industry on the planet, to save biodiversity, etc. There are a number of these industry-driven or industry-led coalition networks which have been working on all these issues. A lot of it I don't agree with, because I think no, you can't really send the fox to guard the hen house, right?
Right.
So there is, of course, I mean, they need to be. It's not a very bad thing. It's good that they're doing it at all, right? Right. In most industries, they don't even care. Right? In this industry, since for all the reasoning that I gave, that it is a soft target, it is image conscious,
exactly,
and it is also it's also a very relatively sensitive industry. In the sense it's not really made so much of thick-skinned people, so people do react, and a lot of these reactions in terms of these initiatives, etc., I think are extremely welcome. I just think that they should be a little more transparent. Otherwise, it really doesn't work. Otherwise, your claim is just a claim.
Right.
It's not science. It's not a fact.
Right. And before I let you go, just a quick observation from you about how you think India's domestic fashion apparel attire industry is handling this.
I mean, I really don't have anything to say, because they're not really, nobody is really doing here much. There is a reason for that. The reason is that you have to understand the nature of the industry itself. It's on one hand you have, say, cotton, assuming that much of it is about cotton, which is true in India. See, the polyester thing, which is about 50%. The global thing, which was it's the reverse here in India. About 2/3 of the market is governed by cotton, and about 1/3 by polyester. And so, which is the reason why when you talk about the industry, or this particular industry, you tend to talk more about cotton. So in India, you have cotton, which falls under the agriculture, which will fall under the agriculture ministry.
Right.
Then you will have so it's a very vast spread of industry. So there are at least 5, 6, 7 ministries which are kind of responsible for what happens in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
So and this thing is reflected in the industry itself. So you have these so many industry bodies. So you have the exporters associations, different exporters associations. You have the different spinners associations. You have the industry is it's not one composite industry in that sense, and for that reason there is no composite industry body which will talk about the industry.
Right.
And since you don't have anybody to talk about the industry, so this is also not reflected in the kind of sustainability or environmental measures that the industry needs to take.
Right. Just to conclude, again, it's somewhat tangential, but it's also directly related to, in some ways, the polyester king of one time, the Ambanis. They began that trend in the 80s. I was, in fact, at the opening of the DuPont plant near Bombay. it was sold as an extraordinary achievement, which it was in some ways. The fact that they put it up very quickly by flouting several things, but that's beside the point. How do you think their presence early on in the polyester space changed things?
So, there's an industry argument to it, and there's also social argument to the entire thing.
Right.
I personally think that the social argument is probably more important. Now, when we know all environmental activists, social activists, etc., want people to move away from polyester, to move away from BT cotton to organic cotton. Now, all those things are very fine. Those arguments do make sense, but not in the way they say. Reason being, so why is it that now polyester became popular? Polyester became popular because it was affordable,
Exactly.
right? So you had so for the beginning of the I remember when we were kids, in the very early 70s and all, any polyester kind of clothing was kind of looked down upon among the middle classes. Oh, that's polyester. Oh, that's like very cheap,
No, it wasn't. Yeah.
whatever. But the thing is that is the reason why polyester was popular, that it was affordable for people who could not buy expensive cotton garments. Now, if a cotton shirt would cost say 100 rupees, or polyester shirt for the same kind of cut, finish, and trimmings, etc., would probably cost 20 rupees. It was affordable for workers. There was the affordable for workers, or so-called say ordinary people to buy clothes, right? Polyester was affordable. That was not the only reason. It was one of the many reasons why the polyester became popular over the years.
Right.
But it has not kind of swung things in its favor. Like I said, the ratio of polyester versus cotton in India is just the opposite. And the reason in India being is that there are also import duties, etc. If the government were to cut down all these import duties, then all these synthetic fibers like polyester will simply boom.
Right.
But Reliance Industries still controls the Indian textiles apparel fashion market, which is kind of not always kind of talked about, because it's the largest textile manufacturer in the country. It also owns a lot of they have the Reliance lifestyle brands and all. It owns a lot of these foreign brands in India. It virtually runs one of the fashion weeks now, and it has been expanding its footprint across the textiles, apparel, fashion industry in India.
Right. On a completely side note, Dhirubhai Ambani once told me in Gujarati about polyester. Said, "Sastama kapra madhyam varg ne apun chu. Why should you mind it?" I hope you understand the first part. You say, "I'm giving people cheap clothes. What is the objection to polyester?" That was his initial argument.
That's why you can't really do away with polyester, despite the fact that you can, despite the fact that it is a fiber derived from fossil fuels and it causes oceanic pollution, etc. That shift, so just before this issue on biodiversity, I had done one on fibers, and the central thing that emerged from all the experts that I spoke to was that shift from polyester and cotton to anything is simply not possible in the immediate or in the foreseeable future. It's not possible. I mean, you can't just simply you can't a manufacturing setup crores and crores and hundreds of crores of rupees. You can't just shift it to something else just because activists or anybody else wants it. You can't do that shift.
No, you cannot. I know. I agree. I mean, it's a pity, but you cannot. So,
but the thing is that there are lots of things still can be done. Is that through legislative measures and other things that you cut down on waste, you cut down on consumption, etc., etc.